Hello, hello, hello. Welcome. Hello, Cheryl and Rosie. Welcome. Please say hello. I'd love to know who is joining us. This is a different time than usual for me, a little earlier than normal. So I'm playing around with time a little bit. This month I'm doing it at noon Pacific. Next month I'm going to do it at 3 p.m. Pacific. Kind of just see how that goes. I know I have a lot of people in Europe who watch, so 3 is a little late, but obviously I have some US people too who 3 is a little too early. And noon is definitely too early. So hello, Barbara and Fred and Michelle. Welcome, everybody. So some of my European friends. This is probably a good time for you guys. So welcome, everybody. I hope you're doing well. How is life? Does anything, I know parts of the world are kind of in a significant lockdown again. We in the US haven't really been, or at least mostly in Arizona, and some other similar types of states. But I know for a lot of you, you are kind of feeling like it was several months ago, which is a little disappointing, I guess is one way to say it. So today is Q&A. Any and all questions around anything related to emotional wounding and healing. So please feel free to ask, share your thoughts. It is also Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And if you aren't aware, I shared in the description of this video a link to a special series that I'm doing for this month, for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And the focus for me is conversations towards trying to end the shame and stigma around being a survivor, talking about the myths and the stereotypes to kind of try to end it, end all of that, so that survivors can start to feel safer, to feel supported, so that they can speak about the story or the struggle. If we would just talk about it, things would be so different. So that's what we're doing here. We're talking about it. So I have my little pin on. So welcome, everybody. So tell me how you're doing. Even if you don't have a question, how are you? How are you coping with where we're at right now, coming into, for this part of the world, coming into spring and summer, for the other part of the world, coming out of fall, I suppose, and heading in towards winter. And here we are still dealing with some of the same things that have been going on for over a year now. So, hello. Please say hello. There are a lot more of you on here, I think, than what has said hello. So please ask your questions, share your thoughts. I'd really like to know how you're doing. Good. Numbers are coming down. That is great. They are going up here. I think across the country, they're going up here. Hello, Isabella. Welcome. So, questions. I need your questions. Hi, Sarah. I'm Michelle. I already said hi, I guess. In Britain, we have No Awareness Month. Oh, yes, I guess it is kind of a US thing. Yes, well, maybe it's not too late. It's not too late. It started here 20 years ago, and most people still don't know it exists. So, but I'm going to keep talking about it. Hello, Natalie. It's also Child Abuse Prevention Month here. So all types of child abuse, which is a blue ribbon, kind of like a royal blue ribbon. And that gets, I think, probably a little bit more attention, maybe quite a bit more attention than Sexual Assault Awareness Month does. I think for obvious reasons. The last Q&A, actually, I think it was Barbara that asked about why people don't talk about it, which is one of the reasons why Sexual Assault Awareness Month has not become a huge thing. Like even autism awareness, that gets quite a bit of attention. Breast cancer awareness gets quite a bit of attention. But even though Sexual Assault Awareness Month has been around 20 years, it's still not in any way, shape, or form mainstream. The White House did, declare it not Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I don't remember exactly what it's called, but it is also Child Abuse Prevention Month. So a lot of different things happening this month. Okay, putting my glasses on now so I can actually read a little bit more, a little bit better. So healing emotional wounds takes time, but workplaces and families don't have the patience they have for physical wounds. Any thoughts? This is a really great question, and something that is unfortunately a very real thing that people can come up against. Sometimes it's a perceived fear or a perceived experience, meaning that there's an idea that people will not understand, people will not be accommodating, but sometimes they actually are. But there's a fear of bringing that because there's a stigma attached, right? With a physical wound, there's no real stigma, but with an emotional wound, with mental health, there's a stigma attached. So we don't want to ask because we assume that people will have a judgment about it. But having said that, there are certainly situations where it's not just a fear, it is a reality. Honestly, one of the things that will be helpful long-term is people talking about the reality of struggle, of emotional struggle, of mental health. Having some companies here in the US have mental health days. So not just like a sick day, but a mental health day. So you don't have to be sick. You can just take the day off because you want the day off. It doesn't mean you have to be struggling, but you can just have a day off because it's good for your mental health. And but the more that we talk about it, the more that we normalize the fact that struggling is natural, it's normal, it's going to happen, that there are times that maybe you're dealing with something in particular that you need a little bit of time off or time, kind of like an accommodation, just as if you had a physical injury or some other kind of thing that you would feel more comfortable going to somebody and asking for some sort of accommodation. Certainly, depending on your work environment, you could actually bring it to human resources and do something, but I know that's kind of pretty far out of most people's comfort zone. But really, the more that we talk about it, the more that we bring things out into the open, the more things are going to change. Just like with Me Too, a few years ago, situations started to change. Workplace policy began to change. because a lot of people at once, which gave it that energy, a lot of people at once started talking about it and started acknowledging it, and the difficulty that it creates, the impact that it has, the fact that it's not okay. Recognizing that virtually every woman has experienced some sort of sexualized experience that she didn't want, ask for, or like, or was even abusive. But that happened. Why? Because people started sharing. People were sharing and retweeting and sharing on Facebook. Me too. So the more that we talk about it, the more things will change. It does take time, but it takes many of us being able to have those conversations. And like I said, it doesn't have to be publicly. You don't have to share a Me Too moment. It can be just having conversations with the people closest to you, acknowledging when you're struggling, being able to work towards feeling open, and which requires vulnerability, but working towards really normalizing having these kinds of conversations. I saw a study that anxiety is the biggest leftover psychological effect of COVID infection. Have you heard this? I can't decide if that's actually true or if it's a year of pandemic life. Yeah. Well, I think, like, obviously I don't know. I don't know anything really all that much about COVID, but my guess would be that it's not so much that the virus itself causes anxiety, but the fear of getting COVID, the fear of having COVID, how it changes your life, and the quarantining and all of it, I think certainly adds to anxiety. And for a lot of people, as I talked about in the very beginning, for a lot of people, there's a lot of things about this whole pandemic that feel really familiar. And what it feels or how it feels familiar is similar to things related to trauma, things that you've experienced in the past. And so for a lot of people, the anxiety that they're feeling isn't solely about the pandemic. It's that it's reconnecting with the anxiety that maybe was already there, the worry, the uncertainty, the lack of control, all of that. So it certainly would make complete sense to me that it wouldn't have to have anything at all to do with the virus itself, but everything associated with the fact that we're living through a pandemic. I'm going to tell my local rape crisis about the need for an awareness month. Maybe they can start something. That would be wonderful, Michelle. That would be absolutely wonderful. In the US, the organization that kind of is, I guess, the organizational body behind Sexual Assault Awareness Month is the NSVRC, National Sexual Violence Resource Center. I'm almost positive that's what it is. So they have a lot of information on their site that talks about Sexual Assault Awareness Month and also what communities and organizations can do to help raise awareness. So that might be a good resource for them. But good for you. If I can help in any way, let me know. Will you talk a little bit about how to make a report to authorities of suspected child abuse? Okay. So every state may be a little bit different, and certainly country may be different as well. But generally speaking, in the US, each state has usually a hotline, and it's associated generally with, again, each state calls it something different, but like the Department of Children and Family Services or Department of Children's Services, something along that line. But you can just look up child abuse, like whatever state you're in, child abuse services, and that will likely tell you what it is. And it's a state, it's a government organization that does kind of oversees the programming and investigations, even if a different, like, nonprofit organization may be the one to do it, the government is going to be the one that kind of oversees all of that. So usually there's a hotline, and you can call. Typically, it can be anonymous, and they will just ask you for the name of the person who you're concerned about, the name of the person, so the child, and then the name of the person that you believe may be harming a child. And they'll ask for your name. Before you start, you can ask if you can be anonymous, if you desire to be anonymous. Generally speaking, I don't think that they typically disclose who it is that made the call. Maybe they do at some point, but I don't think early in the beginning. But usually you can just make a phone call and do that. And one of the things that I know a lot of people struggle with is, what if it's not abuse? What if I am starting something that's going to create more difficulty? There are a lot of challenges that people can face when they think about making a call like that. And I think something that's really important to keep in mind is that, of course, I can't speak for every organization, and I certainly can't speak for every individual investigator that works for the organization. But it really isn't a state's desire to take a child from a parent or a caretaker. When they do that, they have to get involved. They have to use financial resources for that child, and whatever other services may be needed. They need to find foster care. So there is a lot that goes into taking a child away from a situation. That's not what they want to do. But once you make that call, then the trained people will determine, based on what you've shared, what to do about it. So if you're concerned about something, if you have reason to be concerned, and they will ask you why, then in making that phone call, you are doing what you are capable of doing. They then make the decision where to go from there. And sometimes they'll take the information and feel like it's not enough to warrant contact. And if so, they'll usually let you know that. Again, it might be different based on state or organization, but they'll usually let you know if it's not enough to follow up. But generally speaking, they will have then a record. So if somebody should happen to call in again, even if it's you, and you can, if there's another situation that concerns you, you can call that in as well. And if they're not going to communicate with you beyond that, though. So as it progresses, they're not going to keep in touch and let you know what's going on. Again, generally speaking, but they will make the decision. And so you've done what you can do. And whatever happens from there, it's trained professionals who then take that into their hands and make a decision. And I know we've all heard horror stories. And sometimes they get it wrong on both sides, not intervening and intervening when it didn't need to be intervened. I don't know if that's the right way to say that. Did not need intervening. But again, that's something that is beyond our control. So if you feel that there's something that isn't okay, and especially if it's a situation where you can't actually talk to somebody, or you're afraid to talk to somebody that's involved, then making the report, even if it's just in their file, is not going to be a bad thing. As a mandated reporter, there have been times that I struggled with making that phone call. It can be quite challenging. It can bring up a lot of difficult fears that can be there. So hopefully that helps. If not, please feel free to share more. If just one positive has come from COVID, it's how people in government here in Britain are talking about and recognizing mental health issues. Yes, that has been a big shift. I hope that it continues. Kind of like Me Too. It was like a really big thing for a period of time, and then suddenly we're back to the way things were before. I hope that the mental health awareness, the reality of even, people are talking about the significance of what's happening and the increase in domestic violence, and talking about domestic violence a little bit more too. I hope that those conversations continue. And honestly, we can be a part of that. We can be a part of that by us as individuals continuing those conversations, continuing to check in with people, continuing to share how we're feeling. How do you know if what you did to another family member when you were little was or wasn't abuse? I'm an adult now, but at the time we were 8, 9. We're both women, and she says she doesn't remember. Kelsey, this is a really, really good question. It's also a very important question. I actually did a video talking about this a while ago that you might find helpful too. I don't remember the name of it, sorry. But if you scroll through some videos, you might find it. But I did talk about this in another video specifically, but to talk about it again here. So I think the thing that is most important in this scenario that you're sharing here is, how did the other person feel? Because when we talk about like defining it as sexual abuse, it can be a challenging thing, because there's so many factors that go into like a clear legal definition of that. And when it comes to impact and healing, the legal definition doesn't make any difference at all. So in thinking about how that other person feels, or if you know how that other person feels, if you know that they've struggled with it in some way, or that they struggle with life in general, then there's something about that. It's possible that there's something about that experience that left them not feeling very good. Now, I want to be clear. It doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. It could be that they feel shame for engaging in what happened. One of the things that is a factor that can play into, was it natural stuff that kids do, or was it something more than that, is the difference in age. Now, certainly a child of the same age can coerce, force, threaten another child, but if none of that is present, if there's no coercion or threats or anything like that, and children are of similar age and they're both kind of curious and interested in going along with it, then generally that's going to be more normal, natural development. And that is normal. It is normal for children to be curious and to explore and to ask another kid if they want to do something. We've all heard the idea of playing doctor, right? So that there's a lot of normalcy, a lot of normal things that children do when it comes to some sort of sexual types of things. So given that you're both about the same age, if there was no trying to talk her into it, threatening her, bullying her, making fun of her, anything like that, then I would say that that's probably not abuse. Having said that, so for anybody who's experienced something similar on the other side of that, so having said that it's probably not abuse in terms of what could be defined specifically as abuse, it can still have an impact on somebody. It can bring up shame. It can bring up feeling responsible. It can bring up, well, shame actually can hold a lot of different pieces of this, especially you mentioned it was both girls, I believe. Where did it go? Oh, both women. So there are things that can be left with somebody that can cause them to struggle without it having to be abuse specifically. So I hope that makes sense. Given that you actually asked her about it, and she said she doesn't remember, it's possible that she doesn't remember. And obviously I don't know all the circumstances here. It's possible that she doesn't remember, but it's also possible that maybe she just feels really kind of uncomfortable about it and doesn't want to talk about it, which is okay. And that doesn't have to mean that she experienced it in a particularly negative way. She just may be struggling with it for a variety of reasons. But the video that I did, I talk about it a little bit more in depth, so it might be helpful. What do you think about secondary trauma in support groups? How to handle it? Why is it happening? So secondary trauma in a support group can happen, but I would say that, and it depends kind of on how you define secondary trauma. A lot of people have different definitions of it, but what typically happens is that somebody else talking about their experience or their struggle in some way can actually trigger your own sense of that. So maybe it stirs up a similar thought, a similar experience, a similar feeling, a similar fear, or similar shame. And so that's what's being triggered. And it certainly does happen. It can happen. And when people are talking about trauma, it is natural for things to be stirred up in your own mind and body. And one of the kind of helpful things about a group experience is that you may not be conscious of it happening in your day-to-day life, but in a group setting, you're more likely going to be paying attention, so you can recognize if something is maybe impacting you that in your day-to-day life you may not recognize as impacting you. Or it can bring up something for you that you maybe haven't really been able to connect the dots with. So it definitely can happen. How to handle it? Well, in the group itself, hopefully it's kind of talked about that it can happen, and like maybe there's a specific suggestion within that group that they might talk about. But generally speaking, I think if something triggers you and you find yourself kind of struggling being present, then I would say practicing grounding in that setting, practicing grounding if you can. It doesn't have to necessarily take very long, but doing something to really help you ground into the space and become really present, I think would be the first thing to do. I think once the group is over, or maybe even within the group, if you have the opportunity to kind of have a conversation, like where you guys are at or whatever, you could bring it up. You could bring up that when this person talked about this, I noticed this going on with me. And that's actually a really helpful thing to have come up in a group experience. As long as the facilitator is trained and knows what they're doing. So I think that can be helpful. Afterwards, being able to name what happened is important. And then ideally, you would also be working with somebody individually and then processing that together. Because things that come up in group things can come up in group that wouldn't necessarily come up in individual or in your daily life. But if it's coming up in group, there's something really important there that needs to be addressed. So I always encourage people, if they're in a group around abuse, that it's really helpful to be working with somebody individually at the same time, because being able to process what's happening in group, aside from just secondary trauma, but everything that's happening in group, processing that individually can really be very beneficial. So I hope that that helps. Do you have any experience or opinions on the use of neurofeedback and or craniosacral therapy for anxiety, PTSD, CPTSD? So neurofeedback, I think, does have some benefit. Now, it's not going to, as a survivor, it's not going to make your anxiety go away, because the anxiety is there because of the fears that you've held on to about all kinds of things. So that needs to be worked through. But the neurofeedback, I think, has a place, potentially. May not work for everybody, but unlike some other things that I've talked about, neurofeedback likely isn't going to have a negative effect. So it can be worth trying. But again, it's not necessarily something that's going to heal the trauma overall. Craniosacral therapy, I don't have as much knowledge about, but I think that there is certainly, I think it can be a helpful healing tool, a healing experience, kind of like massage. Massage can also be, when done intentionally and mindfully, or experienced, I guess I should say, intentionally and mindfully, can be a really helpful, powerful healing experience, as long as you are in a place where it feels okay to do that. And I think that something like craniosacral therapy can be similar in that sense. Now, if you tend to feel discomfort if somebody is around you in your personal space, if you tend to not want to be touched, if you don't like the sense of feeling not completely in control, then that may not be the best idea. But if you're comfortable in those kinds of settings, then again, it may, and it's something that appeals to you, it may be worth a try. I will say that I have heard from people, some people, who have had it and didn't think that it was a very good experience, but that can sometimes be the person doing it. And it can also be sometimes not enough awareness for themselves about what it was and what they were, kind of how the experience was going to unfold. So I think that that's really important to have a sense of. So what is going to happen? Where am I going to be? Am I going to be laying? Am I going to be sitting? How long is it going to be? Are you going to be talking? So being aware of a lot of those kinds of things before you go into it, I think can be helpful. Last year, a young woman talked about something that I don't have any experience of, but what she said made me go into some kind of shock. So I left the support group. Okay. So that obviously was a pretty significant experience for you in that moment. I don't know what it means. I'm not going to try to suggest what it does mean, because it could mean some different things. But in that moment, what she shared connected with something for you. It could be just a fear. It could be a word. It could be that maybe there was a flash of something even in your body that came up. So it could be a lot of different things. If you haven't actually talked about that with somebody, I actually think it would be really important for you to be able to do that, to be able to share what this person shared, if you can remember, and what you remember about your response to it. Even in the coming, the following hours, what you notice going on, maybe even in the following days, depending on whether you ended up talking about it with anybody. So I do think that it might be something really important for you to be able to talk about. Oh, good, Kelsey. So you've already watched a little bit of it. Good. I'm glad young adults like me have resources that I didn't have when I was younger. Yes, Kelsey, I'm glad too. And I'm glad that you find it helpful, that it feels beneficial to you. I know my young adult life, my childhood, my teenage years, my young adult life would have been quite different had people been talking about it at that time, for sure. Hi, Jack. How would you deal with gaslighting coming from in-laws? I just had a baby and they tend to be very controlling about seeing her. They also tend to gossip a lot about my husband and I. So, Marissa, I would say, and welcome, by the way. Actually, there's a few new names here. Welcome, everybody. How would you deal with gaslighting coming from in-laws? So, I think there's a couple of different pieces here. One is, how do you deal with it logistically, kind of just in your life? How are you going to deal with it? And then there's, how do I deal with it emotionally? And to the first one, I think that it may be important to consider setting some boundaries. So every time I bring up boundaries, I think I really need to get that course out there. I have a course on boundaries that isn't available right now. But thinking about setting boundaries, and those boundaries can look a lot of different ways. So whether it is how much you interact, how you interact, where you interact. You mentioned tend to gossip, so maybe what you do and do not talk about. Maybe even having a conversation about some of your concerns. So that's all connected to boundaries. So there's that part. And that's not easy. That can be quite challenging. The other part is, how do you deal with that emotionally? And with any sort of consideration around boundaries, there is an emotional component to that. So I think part of it is reminding yourself that you have a right to how you and your husband or your partner, I don't know if it's a husband or not, you and your partner, how you want to deal with it. Whether your partner feels like it's a problem or not, because obviously that's going to change things a little bit. If your partner feels like it's a problem, then you can team up and do it together, which is going to be easier. If your partner doesn't think it's a problem, then it's going to be a lot more challenging. But recognizing that how you're feeling is okay, that some of the behaviors that stand out to you or some of the things that stand out to you don't feel okay. And it's okay to feel that way. And that you and your partner get to make decisions about how your family exists in the world. How you want to raise your child, how you want to spend your time. You and your partner get to decide that for your family. So being able to remind yourself that that how you feel is okay. Even if you might overreact to something at some point, it's still okay that you feel the way that you feel. So basically, you're not judging yourself for feeling the way that you're feeling. And then from a rational place where you're not feeling kind of reactive to it, being able to then think about those boundaries and what kinds of boundaries you might want to create for yourself. Depending on how significant it is, you may also want to consider talking to a couples therapist, even just for maybe a few sessions. It might be all that's needed to just kind of help you get a sense of specifically what's happening, like the behavior that's happening, how you're feeling about it, getting you both on board, that kind of thing. But it's not easy, and especially if there's a new baby, because having a new baby also brings up a lot of other emotional kinds of things. So, and especially, and I don't know that this is your history or not, but having a baby and embarking on this new path can really bring up a lot of old emotional wounding if it hasn't been addressed really well. So that adds to some of the struggle that can be there. So I hope that helps, Marissa. Hello. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. Hanu, welcome. In a chaotic family, is it true that a child learns to read people, be hypersensitive to other people's moods and energy? As an adult, how do you know if you are just projecting or reading things wrong? Great question. So the first part, is it true that happens? Yes, it does happen. It is also true that because of all of that chaos, because of self-protection, because of what we attach to the experiences and how we take responsibility and hold on to shame and all of that, that it is also true that we can experience something from somebody, and because we have an expectation of being judged or being judged maybe in some way, because that can cover a lot of stuff. If we have an expectation that somebody is going to judge us or think something about us, then a simple look, a simple pause even, can immediately create a circumstance where you internalize that as disapproval. And in that moment, what you might read into that is, oh, they don't approve of me, or they think I'm crazy, or they don't believe me, or whatever it may be. So both things can be true. As we get older, the truth is that one of the things that comes from growing up in a dysfunctional, abusive home, chaotic home, is that we do tend to build a strong sense of empathy. A really strong sense of empathy, because we know how it feels, even if we're not connected to how it feels. And so we can develop a really strong sense of empathy. And in that empathy, it is easy then to understand how somebody may be feeling. And that's actually a really valuable trait to have, because not everybody has it. Learning to discern the difference between picking up on something, picking up on how somebody's feeling, and some of that empathy, and or can't think of the word, justifiable weariness maybe, you can end up feeling that even if that person isn't doing that. So being able to discern the difference takes practice. It takes connecting to your intuition, because the second example, where it's just taking it personally instead, there's a part of you that can sense what is true. But we tend to be very disconnected from that. And our thoughts override any rational thought, like our automatic thoughts override any rational thought. And so as soon as that uncertainty is triggered, then our subconscious mind goes to all of those other possibilities, the expectations. So being able to then take a step back and say, hold on a minute. What's really going on here? Maybe asking for clarification can be helpful. But it's a practice and it's a process to be able to really kind of discern the difference. I think another thing about being able to, how do you know if you're just projecting or reading things wrong? Another thing that you might be able to think about, and this isn't going to be the case for every situation or every person, but being able to think about, what is the history with this person? Has this person often made you feel this way? Is it their behavior? Is there something that they're actually doing? Or is it just a feeling? Do you have a history of this person, leaving this person feeling bad? Or do you have a history with this person generally of feeling relatively safe and supported? So that's another thing you can kind of consider as you're trying to discern the difference. I went to a group called SIA 12-step group with no professional leading. It became unhealthy and my therapist suggested for me not to go. I realized I was unsafe. Nancy, this is a concern in a lot of types of groups. The dynamic in a group can be incredibly challenging. Groups are incredibly beneficial, and I love groups, and I think they play such an important role in so many aspects of healing, no matter what you're healing from. But groups can also be a place where damage can be done if the dynamic within the group, if there's a dynamic within the group that isn't healthy. And even for somebody who's a trained group facilitator, managing a group with people that are really struggling, especially, is not easy. It really isn't easy. And if it's not a trained facilitator, then there is realistically a pretty significant possibility that things can happen. Again, especially if it's a really vulnerable type of group, where maybe there's a lot of shame, a lot of difficulty with trust, or rejection, abandonment, that kind of thing. It can definitely create some difficulties. And generally, this is a very general statement here. Generally, I don't know that I would ever encourage somebody to go to a group that wasn't facilitated by somebody who is a professional. Now, if you go to, like, for example, and I don't know what SIA is, but like an AA, Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, those are, it's not really a support group, it's a meeting, but it's kind of like a support group. Those are not led by mental health professionals. And I think those are good, and I think they play an important role. But I think that ideally, especially in the beginning, somebody maybe is working with somebody individually to help process the kinds of things that come up in that type of a setting. When I was last in therapy, I was encouraged to do inner child work, but I feel more inclined to focus on how I feel now. How useful is it to keep in touch with my child? Michelle, this is a great question. I think that it kind of depends on where you're at in the deep healing that needs to happen. So, I've known people both as clients and just in my personal life who have done a lot of work in the past um, around different things, maybe even around abuse, uh, and find that they're still struggling with stuff. And sometimes it's just because even if we've done some great work before, life happens. And I think it's important for us to go back to therapy at times, but things happen. And maybe what you need is to just focus on what's going on now. But for a lot of people, the reason that they find that they're still struggling with some things or struggling with things again is because maybe the healing that needed to happen around the childhood stuff hasn't been fully yet healed. So in that sense, being able to kind of just understand what is going on now, what is whatever struggle I'm experiencing, what is that about? And much of the time, it is going to be connected to the past. I've shared this before, but just briefly, I started my healing process over 25 years ago, and about 7 years ago, so I was already in private practice for a while at that point. I found myself struggling with a situation, and I decided to go back to therapy. And I realized in that the reason that I was struggling with something very current that was happening currently, but the reason that I was struggling with that, and I had a lot of feelings about it, and warranted feelings, honestly. But the reason that I was struggling with it so much, the reason it was creating this anxiety within me and this frustration and self-doubt wasn't just because of what was happening right then. It's because it was very familiar to the self-doubt, the questioning that I had a long time ago that I had not yet been able to connect the dots with. And just in that recognition of connecting those dots, it was a huge moment. There was a lot of healing that happened in that moment. So I think it's helpful to really kind of understand, and I think with a therapist is a good place to do that, what might still be present? What familiar feelings that you have now, familiar reactions to the past? What similarities are there? Because that's a good indicator of what might still be left undone. So I hope that that's helpful. Wait, where'd I go? What just happened here? Oh my God, this thing drives me crazy. For y'all looking for a decent virtual support group, I started going to SAS groups, and they're really helpful. Via, could you maybe share what a SAS group is? So I actually worked in a SAS program, but I think it's a different SAS. So I don't know what that means in this context. But thank you for sharing that. What do you think about prolonged exposure as therapy method? What do you think about it in vivo as method? So I think you have to be really careful with these if you are a trauma survivor. In fact, as a general statement, again, every situation is different and every therapist is different, right? As a general statement, it's certainly not one of the first things that I would suggest, if ever. In fact, I don't know that I would ever suggest it. But everybody's different. And so again, going back to like the craniosacral thing, if it's something that feels appealing to you, making sure that you're working with somebody that has a lot of experience with trauma survivors, and not just general trauma, but childhood trauma. Making sure you're working with somebody individually beyond those types of sessions, I think is really, really important. But prolonged exposure, I don't, I just, personally, I don't feel like we need more exposure to the trauma. We need to, like, one of the things that I do often is like talking about like noticing what's in your body, noticing any pain, noticing any uncertainty, any anxiety, like being able to feel that and not run from it. So exposing feelings that are present currently, that's one thing. Going into a trauma and staying in a trauma that feels really traumatic to you still, I don't really think that that's beneficial. The boundary course. It's coming. I have it. I just don't have the platform to put it on yet. But I have it. I guess I could launch it actually the way I did before, doing like a Facebook group or well, yeah, it would have to be a Facebook group because I don't have a place right now to put it. So if you are watching this and you're interested in a boundary course, like right now, let me know. And maybe we could do a Facebook group. And I'm saying Facebook because there I can do live videos. I can do live Q&As. I can share things, and we can communicate, and I can give you prompts and stuff like that. So if there are enough people interested in doing a boundary course on Facebook right now, it's like a 4-week, I think it's 4 weeks course. I would be open to doing that actually relatively soon, maybe starting in May even. So if there are enough people interested, let me know in the comments. If you're not watching this live, let me know in the comments. It's a 4-week course. It's if I'm doing it live, it will probably be a little bit more, but it's a relatively inexpensive course for the stuff that I tend to do. So I almost never commented, but I was wondering, is it common for trauma survivors symptoms like vomiting because of PTSD? Mia, I'm glad that you asked, and thank you for being here and commenting. Is it common to vomit just kind of as an ongoing thing? No. Is it completely unheard of? No, but it's typically going to be related to either anxiety, like extreme anxiety, or it can be also a result of the anxiety creating gastrointestinal issues, which is very common. Gastrointestinal issues and childhood trauma go together like this. It's incredibly common for people that have had childhood trauma to experience a host of gastrointestinal issues and the entire digestive tract. So if you haven't seen a doctor, please see a doctor, because that is not normal under any circumstance. It's certainly not good for your body. And there really could be something going on that could be really important for you to have checked out. And there could also be something going on that may be able to be helped. So please get that checked out. And be honest. For anybody listening to this, you have to be honest about your symptoms. Because if you're not honest, if you're not honest with your doctor about your symptoms, both the length of time that you've been experiencing the symptoms, the types of symptoms, the severity of the symptoms, the whole host of symptoms, if you're not being honest, then what they're basing their decision on is only a fraction of the whole story. And none of us can work with part of the story and give you an accurate or even accurate feedback, really. And I know I've heard from so many people, and I was this way too. Like I give a little piece of the story, or, well, yeah, I've not really been feeling great for a little while now. When in fact, maybe I've been throwing up or having severe pain. Well, if they think that it's just been a little discomfort for a little period of time, well, let's keep an eye on it, see what happens. And then you're likely to leave there feeling like you weren't listened to, that it's really not a big deal, you should just let it go. When in reality, there could be something really serious going on and something that might actually be able to be treated so that you can feel better. We have to, and this is part of the reason why lessening the shame and the myths and all of that is so important, so that when we are struggling with something, we can say to our doctor, this is what I'm struggling with. Please, please, please get that checked out. And for anybody else who is struggling with physical complications, physical unease, pain, please talk to your doctor. I struggled for a very long time with gastrointestinal issues. Fortunately, it wasn't anything really serious, but it was very bothersome and painful. Please, 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 please do not let that stuff get worse. You don't have to live with that kind of discomfort or pain or illness. Going through the process of healing, I'm finding that my life was built on a foundation of trauma responses, and it feels like I have to either destroy my family to get what I need to be happy, or just always be stuck unhappy. Makes me regret the healing. Oh, Via, I'm sorry that you're feeling like you regret it. Please, I get that you feel that way, because you're used to dealing with all that other stuff, right? That's kind of your normal way of showing up and being in the world. This is very new to you, so it feels like this is a lot worse. But your healing is important. You are important. The unfortunate reality is that for many people, as you heal, going back to the idea of boundaries, you begin to recognize that some of the people in your life, and sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's a work environment, you realize that you have people in your life that are really not healthy, that the relationship isn't healthy, they're not healthy, the situation isn't healthy. And sometimes the remedy to that is having to set very rigid boundaries. And what that looks like can be a little bit different. Maybe it means completely ending a relationship. Maybe it means just significantly limiting the kinds of conversations or how often you have conversations. But you said here, I either have to destroy my family. I don't know exactly what you mean by what you would be doing that would destroy your family, but I feel pretty confident that without even having to know exactly what that means for you, that your healing, what you need for your healing, what you need for your happiness, if that means having to set boundaries or speak up or whatever it means, you are not destroying your family. If your family kind of falls apart or is upset, it's not you that is doing that. It is the reality of the circumstance, whether that's how they treat you, whether it's that they don't believe you, whether, whatever that is, it's not you destroying a family. The family may be destroyed because of the truth, because they're not respecting your boundaries, because they're not healthy. because they don't know how to be in a healthy relationship, whatever it is. But it's because of that, not because of you. And this is something that, to some degree or another, almost everybody I've ever known has struggled with within their family. I did. I worried about that in a few different ways. But how you said that there, it is not you destroying your family. And I think that might be the most important thing for you to hear right now. So this is with the in-laws and gaslighting. My husband has started to notice a lot of unhealthy behavior. We both have struggled with codependency all our life. We are both trying to heal, set boundaries, and break cycles. Yes, I'm glad that you're both together on this. That will make a huge, huge, huge difference. And it's not necessarily all that uncommon, either like if somebody gets married or maybe has a child, that you start to see things a little bit differently than maybe you ever had before. And you start to feel a little bit more certain in how you feel or what you need or want in a situation. So make sure that you guys continue to talk about what's happening, because that's really important. I have been healing for over 20 years, and your answer put me in a mind of one of your videos on layers of healing. I'll rewatch. Yes, Michelle, that is something that I know a lot of people really struggle with who have been to therapy before, or even if they haven't been to therapy specifically, but feel like they've done a whole lot of like self-help type stuff, self-development stuff. It really is the truth that there are layers. And even if we have good support, good healing help early in our lives, 20 years ago, that where you were 20 years ago, depending on all kinds of things that were going on, it's possible that you might have only been able to get to a certain point at that particular time because of your life circumstances, because maybe there were certain things or people in your life still, or whatever the case may be. And it may be that particular therapist didn't necessarily have a lot of very specialized training in understanding childhood trauma. It could be one or the other, or it could be a combination of both. So it's very common for people to have had that experience. And I know it can feel so disheartening and disillusioning to think, oh my God, I did this 20 years ago. Why am I still here? Or why do I need to do this again? But that is the reality. And for a lot of people, that is the truth. And for me, when I went back 7 years ago, well, I didn't have to go long term because I had done a lot of work before. I still found myself going back, right? Because there was something that was still a little undone that I didn't know. And that particular experience that I was able to connect the dots, I had done a lot of other healing around that particular experience. I no longer had shame about it. I no longer felt like I did something wrong. I was able to put the responsibility where it belonged, all of that. Yet there was that one piece that fed into my lack of self-trust that I hadn't yet connected. So that was a missing layer for me. So yes, I hope that you do go back and watch it and really consider that maybe it could be beneficial to revisit. Even, depending on the work that you've done before, depending on where you're at now, it may not have to be something particularly long-term. And I don't know the answer to that. But sometimes, and I always say to people, even when you've done really good work, even people that are working with me, so hopefully it's good work, but even when people are working with me and we end, you may decide a year from now or 6 years from now that maybe you need a little refresher because life is hard. Because as we transition through our life stages, things might come up that weren't there before. We might struggle with other things because of our life stage or life experiences that may kind of feel a bit familiar. So going back periodically, I think, is important I know that I will. I have, and I certainly will when I need it. I do virtual sessions. I do. I have a 6-month program where I work with people individually, virtually. I have a wait list for that right now. And then I also offer just like a one-time thing that's virtual, either a 1 hour or a half day virtual session. Actually, it's 2 half days basically. But, well, no, it's like 1 full half day. That didn't make any sense. 1 half day over 2 times. Let me get that straight. Sorry. But I do, and I can actually, you know what? Actually, in the description, I will, when I end this video, I will go into the description of this video and share a link for you. But my website is courageousjourneys.com. So that I can type here. And you can find out all kinds of information there. Hi, Sharia. It's never too late to show up. The family I created with my husband and kids, if kids weren't involved, I know what I do, but they are. So, Via, I know that, well, the scenario that I played out is something that I know somebody will be able to hear and find some benefit in it. This is another important piece of this. I'm not sure what this means necessarily either, but in terms of how it would like destroy your family. I think that, so this is something that I think might be important to talk with a therapist about, like really kind of work through what your fears are. If this particular thing happened, how would you navigate that? What are the pros and cons? Again, I don't know your specific situation. I don't know all the circumstances, but I do still stand by the idea that oftentimes we can have a sense that it's going to destroy something. But in reality, it actually doesn't. It can change things. It can cause situations to evolve and shift. But if it needs to happen, if that ends up happening, then if you look at it if you step back a little bit and look at it from a little bit of a bigger picture, holistically, if that ends up happening, then oftentimes it's probably healthier that ends up happening. Now, again, that's a general statement. I'm not going to suggest that is the case, even necessarily in almost all circumstances. But sometimes what we see as something being destroyed is actually an opportunity for things to become healthier. Kind of like when you have a significant wound that is really infected and you have to go in and I keep forgetting what that procedure is, but you have to go in and get it all cleaned out and everything, right? Like it can seem like maybe there's a scab that keeps trying to develop. It can seem that you're doing damage, like, oh, this is going to create more damage. But the truth is that going in there and getting all of that out, while it can be painful, creates the setting, the opportunity for healthy tissue to grow. Again, I don't know your circumstances. Maybe it would end up being a really horrible situation, but it's just something to consider, that maybe what seems like would be destroyed may actually create an opportunity for something healthier. It's hard in the first of 3 weeks while my therapist is on holiday. That's That's a long time. But I'm really hoping we will be able to see each other face to face after the break. Have you found working remotely strange too? Jack, when I first started doing the work virtually, I did, but that was almost 7 years ago. I really wasn't sure how it would work. I wasn't sure if it could work. I was quite skeptical. But I've been doing it for quite a long time now, and I've had a lot of different clients over these 7 years. And while I still would prefer in session, which is part of the reason I do the retreats, like ideally it would be in session or in person, but I have found that there are other benefits that you can do that you get virtually that you can't get in person, that people can feel sometimes more comfortable, and some other things too. But I find that at this point, it feels quite natural. It feels quite natural, though I do miss the in-person stuff. I struggle living in this state of dissociation. I am fighting it, but realize I am there so much. It isn't helping me anymore. Working on it in therapy. Are you saying the dissociation isn't helping anymore, or the working on it in therapy isn't helping anymore? I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure that I understand there. So AJ, if you could clarify that, that would be helpful. Would you like to talk about the stigma of breaking away from your parents? I'm assuming that this means kind of in terms of setting boundaries. And I think there are a lot of different pieces. Part of it can be cultural, part of it can be societal, part of it can be in our own family setting and our own kind of fears and values. But there is a sense that, like, people hear all the time, oh, they're your parents. You'll regret it one day, or, well, they're your parents. You have to just do what they want you to do, or don't be like that. They're your parents. That's the same mentality that says when somebody is sexually abused or assaulted, oh, it happened a long time ago. Don't bring that up now. Don't rock the boat. It's the same thing. So what needs to change is that the conversation needs to change. We need to recognize that if there are people in our lives who are not healthy, who don't respect us, who do not honor our boundaries, we need to normalize that that is what healthy people do. They say, okay, then I'm not going to have a relationship with you, or I'm going to have a very limited relationship with you, whatever that needs to look like for you. That's the normal thing people do, right? Kind of like people have an idea that if a partner cheats on you, well, while it doesn't necessarily happen for a lot of different reasons, but a lot of people would say, well, if somebody cheats on you, then you end the relationship. Like, that seems like a normal thing, right? Well, like, it's expected. It's actually encouraged. Well, if we have these conversations enough, one day it will be encouraged when we are in relationship with somebody who disrespects us. Maybe not in the same way that cheating disrespects us, but if somebody is disrespectful, if somebody doesn't have good boundaries, if somebody doesn't honor what we need, then we have to set that boundary. And that's the healthy thing to do. But it's not easy. And truthfully, setting boundaries in general, especially if you've never really had boundaries, understood what your own boundaries are, then it's incredibly challenging. Setting boundaries with family members are generally the most difficult boundaries to set. There can be a lot of guilt that comes up in that. But as I tell people quite often, dealing with the guilt of setting boundaries is better than dealing with the continued wounding that happens because those boundaries are not there. So I think that's an important thing to consider as well. Um, sorry, hold on a second. I have been abused, and for years I suffered in silence. How can one handle flashbacks and disclosing to parents? So, disclosing to parents is a huge topic. There are so many factors that play into that. The relationship that you have, who the abuser is, um, the relationship you had, the current relationship, other family members. Like, there's a lot of different pieces that play into it. And generally, I would say that if you are considering disclosing to somebody like a family member, especially if the family, particularly, I guess, if the family member is an abuser, or if your abuser is a family member, sorry, can't talk today, or if your family knows the abuser, working with somebody individually as you think about disclosure, I think is really important, because disclosure can bring up a whole host of things that you end up struggling with. Even if it goes fairly well, it can still bring up a lot. Obviously, I don't know your circumstance, so maybe it will go well, and I hope that it does. But unfortunately, for the majority of people I know, when they disclose to their parents, again, especially if it's somebody that the parents know, the disclosure isn't met in the most appropriate way. So it can actually create more damage. If it's not somebody that your parents know, then the likelihood of it not going as poorly increases. But even then, it can still be quite difficult, because they can still feel guilty. They can have their own issues come up. So working with somebody as you're thinking about doing it and as you do it, I think, is going to be really important. That's what I would suggest. In terms of flashbacks, working to become really grounded and present when you are not having flashbacks is really important. So practicing grounding techniques, and there are a lot of different grounding techniques, but practicing grounding techniques periodically. Maybe there's just a little bit of anxiety and you practice. Maybe you're actually feeling really good and you think, okay, I'm going to practice some grounding right now. Because the calmer your nervous system is when you're practicing some of those grounding experiences, the more you're connected to it, the more you're able to feel into it in your body. If you only practice grounding techniques when you are triggered, when you're in a heightened state, then it can still be helpful, but you're trying to ground, like your nervous system is way up here. So the grounding that you do maybe gets you to here. If you are practicing getting your system used to feeling present and grounded, if you're here and you practice, then it helps get your system down a little bit more, so that when you are triggered, instead of going way up here, you maybe come to here. So grounding exercises when you're not necessarily triggered, as well as when you are, and then working with somebody individually as you're thinking about disclosing to your parents. Is it common for people to be scared or overwhelmed when they become aware of how much of their life is affected by stuff, and fear that the therapy process will need to be long? Yes, absolutely. In fact, so much so that that's when people often stop, which is heartbreaking. Part of the reason that it's overwhelming is because part of coping has been to deny and minimize, right? No, it wasn't a big deal. No, it wasn't abuse. No, I'm not really affected by it. No, I healed that a long time ago. So you have survived by telling yourself that you weren't affected by it. So when you start recognizing, when you start really accepting that you are in fact affected by it, it literally can overwhelm your system. You're facing for the first time things that you've worked really hard at not facing. People also have an idea when it comes to healing is that, okay, I just need to dive in, tell me what to do. I'm going to do the work. I'm going to do it. And then I'm going to be healed, which I get. I completely understand that. I think that's a natural thing. And so you have this expectation that you've set for yourself. Like, okay, it's kind of like you've talked yourself into doing the thing that you really don't want to do. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to jump in, and like jumping into a really cold pool, or telling somebody for the first time that you love them. Okay, you're talking yourself up, right? I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to do it. And then you do it. Okay, I did it. Okay, that's done. Well, people kind of have the same expectation that healing is going to be similar. Okay, I'm going to do it. Let's just do this and get it over with. Except it doesn't quite work that way. And so because you had the desire for it to be, okay, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to get out. Because you recognize that, okay, wait a minute, that's not going to really work here. It obviously feels overwhelming. It feels uncertain. It feels scary. It feels vulnerable. And for a lot of people, instead, they decide to give up on their healing, at least for a period of time. It's one of the reasons why people will go to therapy at one point, stop, and then years later decide to go back. So yeah, very common. What is dissociation? Dissociation is, well, there's a spectrum of dissociation. Dissociation is when you are not fully present. It's really kind of as simple as that. It can be as simple as forgetting why you walked into a room, to dissociative identity disorder, where you have different personalities, which is actually quite rare. I know the term is thrown around a lot and people say people have it. It's quite rare for that, but there's a spectrum of dissociation. Like most of us have had an experience of getting somewhere, but not remembering the journey to get there. Like in a car or in a train or something, like I don't remember going through this stop or whatever. You just know that you're there. That's a form of dissociation. So it can look a lot of different ways. Oh, thank you, Michelle. Okay, so I'm fighting it, but I realize there's so much the dissociation. It isn't helping me anymore. Okay, yes. Dissociation can be actually a helpful coping mechanism when you need it. And typically you need it as a child more so than as an adult, but even as an adult sometimes. But dissociation does serve a purpose. And again, the extreme end where you have different personalities, that's quite rare. It certainly is real though. But dissociating, like I said, can look a lot of different ways. But as with most coping mechanisms that we develop early in life, they typically are not very helpful to us in our adult lives. In fact, can create more problems in our adult lives. So with dissociation, I think recognizing, is there a pattern to the dissociation? Is there a particular thing that tends to happen when you dissociate? And if so, becoming aware of what that is, so that when you're going to be in a situation where that thing is going to happen or you're going to experience that, you can practice being really present. So grounding exercises before you go into that situation. And again, practices that help you become really present, engaged in your body. So being really present with what's happening in your body, where you notice any sort of sensations, even noticing like the heaviness in your seat when you're sitting, the temperature on your skin. So all of those types of things to help you become really present. Um, Generally speaking, I think are some of the most important things to do, but paying attention to see if there's any sort of pattern to when the dissociation happens. I feel like therapy gets less scary over time. Yes, usually it does. Ideally, hopefully it does. It gets easier to surrender to the process and not obsess about when it ends. But then it comes in ways I get frustrated again, feel like it'll never work. Yes, that's also quite normal. And that process that it kind of, there's some ebb and flow in it. And the idea that it gets easier. And it does get easier because you begin to hopefully feel a little bit safer. You begin to kind of settle into the process a little bit more. And hopefully, you're also healing as time goes on. It is very tempting to quit on healing, but then a reality check reminds me how life was before. Denial seems like it felt better, but not really. Survival rather than living. Yes. Yes to all of that. That point about the reality check reminds me how life was before. And it is easy to think, oh, I felt better before I started doing all of this. And in some ways, if you just kind of look at it on the surface, it does seem like maybe you felt better before or that life was better before. But it feels that way because it's what you're used to. Not because it truly did feel better, but you were used to it. You knew what to expect. You knew how to handle it. For the most part, you knew how to deal with it. You knew what to expect. So your system got accustomed to it. But for the most part, it really wasn't good. It wasn't healthy. It wasn't happy. You didn't feel free. You didn't feel whole. You didn't feel safe. Maybe you isolated. You didn't have the kind of relationships you wanted. Like all of that, if you look at it, is often there. But it feels better because what you're experiencing when you start healing is all new. It's unknown. And for almost all of us, the unknown feels a lot scarier, a lot worse than what we do know, even when it doesn't feel good. So yes, survival rather than living. And you, all of you, deserve to live free from a place of freedom and ease that feels safe, trusting in yourself that even when things are hard, that you're going to be okay, that it's okay and safe to have support. That is what healing means to me. Because you will never get to a place, it's impossible for any of us to get to a place where we don't struggle at times, where we don't feel sad or hurt or grieve, certainly. Because life is life. We experience loss. Relationships are hard. Things happen. The difference is that when you come from that place of freedom and worthiness, when it happens, the experience is so completely different than when you haven't yet healed. Reconciling behaviors as an adult. Pervasive incest abuse strikes core shame, and you can only survive until you can trust and love yourself. Such a struggle. Yes. Learning to trust yourself is an ongoing process, I think. We can certainly get better at it, but that is the thing that I find I still feel challenged with at times. Exposure therapy accelerated my healing. Zoe, I think that's Zoe, says exposure therapy accelerated my healing. Good. I'm assuming that means that you had somebody really good that knew exactly what they were doing. And like I said, it's just an opinion. What works for one person may not work for somebody else, or what doesn't work for some people is going to work for somebody else. So I'm glad that it was helpful and did not end up creating more difficulty for you. Healing is terrifying at times, but that is why knowing that you came from where you are to where you are now. Oh, me. I think this means me. So knowing where I am to where I am now, where I was and where I am now. Okay. Thank you, Isabella. Exposure therapy. So I don't know specifically what Zoe's experience was, or Zoe. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. I don't know what that particular experience was, but the idea of exposure therapy is that you are exposed to the things that create difficulty for you, the things that create difficult feelings, emotions, memories, that you're exposed to it, and eventually you desensitize to it. And so it doesn't have that kind of reaction for you any longer. Okay, so it was the most painful. However, after it freed me to the most. So can I ask a question here? Just because I don't know anything about what kind of program they might be offering there. Was it exposure specifically to the trauma, to where you stayed with the trauma itself for a period of time, like not just at one particular time, but over and over again? You don't have to, but I'm curious about your experience there. My goodness, it's been over an hour and a half already. So a reminder, so I'm going to wait and give Zoe a minute here to see if she's going to, or he, I think it's a female, but I'm not sure. So just a reminder that I'm going to be doing these live Q&As for the near future anyway, on the second Thursday of the month. And I'm going to alternate time. So today it was at 12 noon Pacific. Next month, second Thursday, it will be at 3 p.m. Pacific. And I believe once I create once I schedule the live, I believe that you can post things ahead of time. So if you've got a question, but you can't attend live, I believe that you can do that. Okay. So this is about a very specific thing. Okay. So, and thank you for sharing this. And just for anybody maybe reading this is actually a very common thing. And I did a video on this as well. Something along the lines of your body's natural response to sexual pleasure or something like that. So during one of my sexual contacts with my stepdad, I felt pleasure, and that caused me to feel that I wanted it. Absolutely, that you would feel that way, but it's not because you wanted it, but that's just what we tell ourselves about it. That's a way that we take responsibility for it and feel shame. And it's the whole thing is very common. So thank you for sharing that. So again, it really depends on the particular situation. I would say if somebody's going to try exposure therapy, it needs to be with somebody, a trained clinician, mental health professional, with a lot of experience. Please do not do it with somebody you find online. And I would also say probably not virtually. I definitely would say that I would not recommend it virtually. For some people, it could potentially work, but for the vast majority of people, I don't think that doing something like that virtually would be a good idea. I come from a background of an alcoholic and verbally abusive mother. My mom never held space for me to express my feelings. I grew up feeling I was never enough. I am still healing. That's an incredibly difficult type of childhood to grow up in. A lot of needs not being met. And sexual abuse is incredibly damaging. But not having our emotional needs met for whatever reason, however that happens, has such a deep impact. Like when I talk about the layers, like there's so many layers to that. And then of course, when you add on top of it, the alcoholism, and what that can create in a family, there's definitely a lot there to heal. And I hope that you give yourself the space to be able to do that. And the support. We all need support on this journey. Does it count as abuse when an older child touches a younger child inappropriately? I think my biggest struggle right now is feelings of guilt and shame. So there was actually a question earlier on where I talked a little bit about this. And I also have a separate video that's not Q&A, where I talk about it. And I don't remember the title, but if you kind of scroll through some of my videos, you'll probably find it. And so you'll have more information there. There are different factors that play into this. I don't know if you're the one being touched or the one touching, but there are a lot of factors that play into whether it's abuse or not. What matters is how you feel. Truly, like really what matters is how the people involved feel about it. So I would encourage you to maybe take a look at that other video to get kind of a little bit better sense of what I mean by that. Or watching earlier on in the video, I don't know at what point I talked about that earlier. But either way, holding on to guilt or shame, whichever child you were in this situation, holding on to either guilt or shame is not something that is going to be beneficial. In fact, it's going to create more damage. So whichever person you are in that situation, it's important to do the healing work that you need to be able to do, because holding on to shame can literally destroy a person's life. So please get support to help you with that. Okay, so a reminder too, if you've come in a little bit late, the idea of the boundaries course came up, and I've been waiting to put it on my platform, but that's not ready yet. But it came up again today. So if people are interested in doing the Sacred Boundaries course inside of Facebook, you can create an alias. You don't have to use your real Facebook, or you don't have to use your real name. But if you would like to do the Boundaries course, it's a 4-week course. If you would like to do the Boundaries course inside of Facebook, it will be videos, it will be live Q&A and journal prompts and that kind of thing. If you would like to do that, excuse me, let me know in the comments. You can leave them in the actual video itself in the description or in the comments of the video. That would be really helpful. And if there are enough people interested, then I will look into doing that soon. So, my goodness, sorry. Yes. So I don't know if you saw, but Michelle is saying, I love your courage. I can relate. A lot of people can relate. Me too. So thank you all for being here, especially if you've been here from the beginning. This has been a long one. Thank you all for joining me. And thank you so much to the new people that are here. I hope that you have found this helpful. If you have not yet subscribed, please do. Make sure you click on the little bell for notifications. Subscribing helps other people see my videos. So I would appreciate that. And I imagine they would too. So thank you all for being here, and I will look forward to seeing you soon. Also, if you're not on Facebook, or if you are on Facebook and you're not following me, please follow me because I share different things there sometimes and upcoming things that are going on. Also, in the description, I have a link for a special series for Sexual Assault Awareness Month, where I'm sharing basically like a podcast episode, some different things around sexual abuse and assault, talking about how things related to ending the shame, stigma, stereotypes, and myths. So please join me. It's on my website. And I would love for you to leave your thoughts, comments, and experiences. So thank you, everybody. I will look forward to seeing you soon. Bye.